let's start a business of shaping policy for today by looking at the projection of the International Monetary Fund. The IMF on Tuesday upgraded its outlook for the year, as against what it predicted in January that the annual growth is going to be at 3.1%. The IMF has shifted its position, saying it's going to be at 3.2%. Now, according to IMF, the world is heading for a global soft landing. What is the implication of this, and what will be the impact of these in months to come? That will be the thrust of our conversation now. And we're being joined by our in-house analyst. We have Sam Orovwuje, who joins us this morning. Glad you have you join us on NXT.
Good morning, Femi. My pleasure to be here.
Good morning, sir. Welcome to the show.
Good morning. Blessing. Thank you.
You know, when IMF speaks, the world listens, because when it comes to the position of the IMF as regards global economy, analysts are always eager to know what it's going to look like. So the IMF had a press briefing on Tuesday to shift ground as regards the world global economy from 3.1% to 3.2%, indicating or giving the impression that the world is heading to a soft landing. How do you react to this, and what is the development to this kind of projection?
Thank you very much indeed. I think that press briefing on Tuesday was done essentially before the spring meeting of IMF that is ongoing, that is likely to end by tomorrow. So those projections in terms of outlook, if you disaggregate the percentage, there's really not much difference with what they projected in January. So there's just a little marginal increase in terms of what they think. But by and large, they look at some of the economic variables or indicators that will shape the economies of the world, particularly the developed economies and the emerging economies. And if you look at those projections from the research department of the IMF, I don't really see anything significant beyond what they had mentioned in January. So if you look at a projection of 3.1%, 3.2%, and they are saying before the end of the year, there's a likelihood that the threshold of 3% will be maintained towards the end of the year. Nevertheless, the geopolitical tension in some part of the countries of the world may likely impact negatively in some, whereas in some places that will improve on the outlook. And the Europe area will have some rebound towards the middle of the year. The mention of Africa, to a very large extent, has to do with the areas of inflation that is discomforting, particularly for some of those countries. And they equally talked about the impact of our artificial intelligence will improve on productivity. And so if you look at the general outlook, there's a hope that the economy globally will rebound from the middle of the year towards the end of the year. So I think that's, but then some other countries, particularly the emerging market, must equally take advantage of new technologies, and how that can improve their productivity. Then they need to work hard, particularly on inflation and lending rates that are not really conducive for small and medium enterprise, particularly in Nigeria.
All right, so the IMF new outlook report actually did say that there are stronger activities than expected in US and China, but it's weaker in the Eurozone. Could you, are there any reasons you could adduce for this, why in China and in US there's stronger activity, but in the Euro area it's weaker?
Yeah, in spite of the challenge, US remain a dominant economy. When you move away from that, you'll be talking about China. So look at some of those economic activities within those advanced economy. Those activities will continue to improve on the growth outlook and their development. On the other hand, apart from France, Germany, and Sweden, I guess, they've been challenged in the Eurozone, but they're able to take cognizance of those challenges. The rebound that they predict may take some little months before those improvements will come true.
All right, let's bring in another guest, another global affair analyst, and also a legal practitioner who joins us virtually. We have the privilege of hosting Barrister Jide Ologun. Glad you have you join us this morning.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure.
Yes, it's been a while. Good to see you. All right, let's look at the projection for the... Oh, okay. I learned that something just happened there as regards connection. Okay, let's bring the conversation back to Sam. The IMF made projection about the U.S. economy, and I'll still want you to shed more light because I understand U.S. economy is one of the largest economies in the world. But the IMF is making a position or a kind of explanation that the activities in the U.S. has also influenced the outlook for the year. How significant is this kind of activities as regards the U.S. economy?
If you look at some of the issues that has happened in the U.S. In the last 5 to 6 months, in terms of the challenge they had in terms of passing those bills into law, and you look at the growth in terms of employment in the U.S., these are positive indicators that we help the economy in a sustainable manner. Therefore, if you look at those projections in terms of economic activities that are sustainable, then the economy will help to project in terms of the inflation that the Federal Reserve Bank has been able to maintain over a period of time. So if they say there's not going to be a rate cut for over a period of time, I think investors will find a way to see how they can bring some investment to bear. On the other hand, China too is growing stronger in terms of economic activity. So once those economic activities are sustained, then there's bound to be economic growth, which will lead to some development, which will impact those economy positively.
All right, I learned Barrister Jide Ologun is back with us. Glad to know you're with us, Barrister Jide Ologun. All right. What comes to mind when IMF makes prediction, and how do you react to the activities of this agency since its existence and its role when it comes to global economy? Let's start with that.
Thank you very much. The IMF is like a guiding light for global economies, to forecast and also evaluate performance. And from the brilliant analysis of my brother in the studio there, you can see that concerning the latest release from IMF concerning the 2024 economy, you can see the US and China appearing on the platform of shining lights. And nobody should be surprised about that. The efforts of these two great nations in building their economies. But having said that also, we still have the issue of the top 10 GDP countries for 2024. You talk about United States is there, China is there, Germany is there, Japan is there. And no one should be surprised about that. Again, despite their challenges, these are countries that are very serious about creating an enabling environment for economic effectiveness in their region. And again, in 2024, we have the projection of the world's richest countries. And you talk about Luxembourg, and not many people in the world even pay attention to these, some of these nations. We talk about Ireland, we talk about Singapore, and you talk about Qatar. And when you talk about Singapore as one of the projected richest countries in 2024, you can understand. You saw how deliberately Lee Kuan Yew created a first world country from a third world country. This Singapore left Malaysia in 1965. We're very fortunate to have a visionary leader. And you talk about Qatar. Recently, our president was in Qatar with an entourage to have bilateral discussions with Qatar. And you cast your mind back on the World Cup that Qatar hosted. So these are serious nations that are engaging their economies. And basically, we have global challenges for all nations. And interestingly, we've heard US featuring China, the Euro area. Little is mentioned, if at all, about Africa. And that is a huge challenge to us. I did a research and discovered that Africa as a continent holds about 40% of the total resources of the world. So what are we doing with these resources? So that is where we are. And of course, the IMF has come out to say that the global recovery will be steady or slow. And again, that will differ from region to region. And the baseline forecast is for the world economy to continue growing at about 3.2% during the 2024 timeframe and 2025 at the same pace in 2023. So you find some nations, striving to make progress. And I hope that Africa as a continent and Nigeria in particular, we also, leverage on this forecast and see how we can manage our business environment, our fiscal policies, monetary policies, and different kinds of government policies to ensure that we benefit from this forecast. So that is where we are for now. And of course, this is again another time of what you call performance evaluation. So you can now identify the regions of the world that are doing well despite the global challenges that we have. And the lesson for those that are not doing well, they call some of them emerging economies. And when you talk about emerging economies, it means that you have what it takes to emerge as a great economy. But how are you going to manage the opportunities you have to come out as a great economy?
All right, thank you for joining us. So in spite of the outlook that IMF has provided for the world, which seem to be a bit improved, like you've said, there's some areas that are not doing very well. Now, one of them is Europe. Now, what can you say is the reason why the Eurozone is considered to have weaker activities compared to what you have in China and the US?
Definitely, it's a function of competition. And when you talk about economy, you talk about production and, of course, consumption of goods and services. And you talk about the policies you have in your nation. I made mention of Singapore as one of the rich countries. If you look at Singapore, what Singapore did was to create the local wealth magnet by establishing a friendly environment for investors across the world who came in there to do business. And you talk about the ease of doing business. You talk about the strength of the policies that they have in there. And little surprise. And you also look at the United Arab Emirates also. It's the same thing that was done. Supportive infrastructure, energy, different kinds of policies that we attract. So perhaps America has gone ahead, China has gone ahead, and you know that America has a liberal approach to business. This is a country where opportunities are there for those who want to excel. It's not a closed economy. And you look at China. China is basically a productive nation. Even when Chinese travel out of their country, they participate in building infrastructures, and so it's quite remarkable that what we are talking about is how you engage your resources and the results you produce. So Europe, we still have the Euro region, we have a lot to learn And of course, in the past, we have read of the Asian tigers. So these are people who deliberately develop their economies. And when you want to find out in Africa if there are some countries also trying to pick up, talk about Mauritius, you talk about Rwanda, and then just to mention two for now that are making deliberate efforts to also rise up. And maybe you look at Botswana, perhaps maybe South Africa also. So it's now for Africa to rise up and engage their resources maximally. So the Euro region, we still have to put a lot in place in creating an enabling environment and attracting businesses into their communities. And there is this thing we talk so much about, which is FDI, foreign direct investments. What will attract investors to come to your region? Because they bring in their wealth to your region. And then on the contrast side, what we experienced recently in our wonderful country, Nigeria, is that some investors were getting out of the country, out of the frustrating business environment, and that will not in any way promote prosperity. So I think China and the US, they have, set a very brilliant example for other global countries to study. Let me say this. I did a study on the magic of Singaporean transformation. One of the things Lee Kuan Yew did was to study the viable economies across the world and try to implement what they implemented and trained people within his country to uphold that economic value system. And I think it helped a lot in building Singapore into what it is today.
Let me bring the conversation back to Sam, who is here with us in the studio. I'm going to seek his opinion, then I'll come back to you, Barrister Jide Ologun. Now, talking about world global economy outlook for the year, what will be the impact of the ongoing, war between Russia and Ukraine, and also the disruption it has brought to the global chain? Because when you make this kind of predictions, it's always based on certain conditions. But what will be the impact of these crises, this global crisis, on this kind of projection, looking at what is going on between Israel and Hamas, and then the link to Iran as well?
If you look at the research output of the IMF, they spoke in details about the impact of global tension, particularly in Ukraine and Russia. If you look at Israel and Palestinian tension, this will have some in terms of positive implication for supply chain. On the other hand, those tensions will equally be a disincentive in terms of investment going to some of those countries. So, but what our research brought about was just to look at it diplomatically, what global tension will impact in some of these regions, whether they are positive in terms of how it will impact those economy, some negative impact in some other areas will boost trade to some extent. So, but then in terms of the tension, but I think that tension will affect the global economy in the larger sense of the word, because where supply chains are disrupted, it will impact negatively on the economic activities of even some of these countries that we just mentioned. But what is important for me is that Africa must take some really good lessons from some of those projections which the barrister has highlighted in details. What kind of policy framework, what kind of investment opportunity are we able to sustain in Africa? What kind of visionary leadership that will inspire productivity so that we can have more investment that will sustain economic prosperity for citizens in Africa? So the outlook is like a signpost that will guide various regions and economies to see how they can take advantage of some of the opportunities, look at some of those weaknesses and some of the threats that the global tension portends. So to what extent can you exploit those opportunities for prosperities of your citizens?
All right, let me take this to Barrister Ologun. Now, according to the IMF outlook, it also says that there is a fading of energy price shocks globally, but we do not see that actually in Africa, because energy price is rising in Africa. Take, for instance, Nigeria. Why is there disparity between what is playing out in other regions than Africa?
You know, that is the paradox I referred to by insinuation the other time. Let's come to Nigeria, for instance. Nigeria has the largest deposit of proven gas in Africa, and we still experience collapse of the grid. We still have various excuses, not shortage of gas to provide electricity for economic activities. So what do you expect in such a region? So when you now find the evaluation report of having about 140 million citizens, up to about 220 citizens being in the multi-faceted poverty window, then you will know where that is coming from. There are two sides to national prosperity. You talk about the resources and you talk about the resourceful engagement of the resources. And if you look at section 16 of the Nigerian Constitution 1999 as amended, it has stipulated how the resources should be engaged to create a self-reliant economy. I mean, by and large, that can now begin to attract a foreign direct investments. But have we done that in Africa? I mean, I just made mention of gas. How much do we even buy the cooking gas in the country? We flare our gas. We have made several promises to stop it. Now, let's look at the cost of diesel, which is an alternative source of energy for industrialists. Is it not excruciating? And so you look at the pump price of petroleum to even move food items around and other products. Now, the argument is that the Naira is gaining strength in the Forex environment. That is correct. But what has it brought down the price, the pump price of petroleum that you need, or do you need dollars to move food from Benue State to Lagos State? The answer is no. So you find that we have not been able to tame our inflation and the cost of food. So we need to work on all this. And if you don't have an enabling environment, as we make reference to it in public relations, people will not be inspired to come and invest massively in your environment. There was a time China moved beyond made in China to make in China, which means come to China to produce, then export. At a time in this country, an industry left Nigeria for Ghana because of the cost of production, that it was, more cost effective to produce in Ghana and import to Nigeria to sell. So who bears the brunt? Now we talk about our crude oil resources. We still export our crude oil to refine in Europe and some other countries that have been wise enough to develop their refining capacity at a huge cost. So we bring these products back to the country and sell at premium. Even though the president on the day of being sworn into office said subsidy was gone. In this week, we've been reading about people saying, no, subsidy is back, even at a very high premium. So where do we go from here than to sit back and look at what IMF is projecting and see how we can sanitize our economy? You see, the IMF works to foster global monetary cooperation, to secure financial stability, facilitate international trade, promote high employment and sustainable economic growth, and reduce poverty around the world, just as the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. So, and there is room for global partnership. One thing I have really enjoyed in life is to look at those who are doing better than I do, learn from them, try to copy them, and move at that pace. We also should do that as Giant of Africa. You see, we have about 190 members of the IMF. So it's not as if we are the only one. That's why I mentioned earlier that surprisingly, this IMF release, Africa wasn't prominent on the list. And that is the truth of life. If you appear not to be serious, you are left behind to your challenges. So these are issues of our time. We really need, like you just mentioned now, what is now the tariff for energy has gone up, making it more complex for industrialists to survive. What is the cost of even clearing your goods at the port? So you see inflation crushing the people. And of course, the byproducts of this will be unemployment, hardship in the land, poverty, rather than prosperity. And permit me to mention this. When you even talk about energy, fuel is very critical. Crude oil was discovered in 1956 in commercial quantity in Nigeria. We started producing in 1958. The first refinery in this country was inaugurated, how do you call it? Came into operations in 1965. Can you imagine? And we have about 4 state refineries that have gone moribund, and we still pump so much into it. And today, what is the total indebtedness of Nigeria as a nation? It's knocking at the door of about 100 trillion. It was about 12.12 trillion naira in March 2015. So these are issues. So we really need to sit back, because my concern is my country, the giant of Africa, with huge potential. The other time, my vice president was in Switzerland or so, to market Nigeria, that we have potentials. I quite agree with that. We do have potential, but how can we create the environment to maximize that potential, to create commonwealth for common good? And these are the challenges before us. I argue that, talking about gas, for instance, if Nigerians get gas free from government to cook, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. In fact, Nigeria should be known for an environment where energy is at its lowest cost, and you find investors rushing in here to produce, even when they need to export to other countries to sell. And again, look at the population advantage we have. Nigeria is a huge market for investors, but we are not even discussing the issue of insecurity and the various kinds of challenges we have. So we'll have a long way to go, and we hope that this government will rise up. And like I said earlier, please let the National Assembly, the executive, let them come together, the MDAs, and study Section 16 of the Nigerian Constitution 1999 as amended, and look at the provisions that are there. Even though you cannot sue the government on whether they carry out the mandate of that section of our Constitution, but at least let there be performance. Let the people rejoice. Let there be prosperity. Nigeria is one of the emerging economies, as we say in economic terms, that the world is looking at. But what kind of business environment do we have? And I put that question on the table of the leadership of this nation right now. Sincerely speaking, if we put our acts together, within 2 years, we may hit the button of being the third richest country in the world, going by the resources that we have. And those are my submissions in the interim.
All right. Barrister Jide Ologun seems to be very optimistic about the projection for Nigeria if all things are equal and then the leadership does the right thing. This brings us to the projection of the IMF for Nigeria. According to IMF, the inflation rate is going to drop to, or they foresee that inflation will drop to 23%. From what we have presently, from now till like 2025, that's going to be a drop in the inflation rate. How do you react to that? And if that is going to happen, what would you expect the CBN and the federal government to do in this regard to ensure that this projection could be something to go by?
The 23% projection by the IMF by 2025 looks promising. But if you look at the current operating environment, that is very harsh for small and medium enterprises, to achieve that projection looks a bit difficult, where the bank, the central bank in particular, is lending to commercial banks at the rate of about 24.75%. And by the time the commercial banks are lending to the real sector, I'm sure you're going to be ending at about 30% or 30-something% or thereabout in terms of what the real sector, which is the engine of growth of any economy, can do with that kind of interest rate. Therefore, even at the rate of 23% that is projected for 2025, 23% in terms of inflation rate is still very high. Therefore, like Barrister Ologun has just posited, that the operating environment, the ease of doing business, visionary leadership, in order to see how we can change our trajectory in terms of economic development to create prosperity for citizens is very critical. So the rates or the inflation rates currently look very high, and to sustain a 23% in another maybe 12 months from now looks a difficult task, but projections are just a guide for people to think. Therefore, in terms of evaluation, the economic managers must go back. The central bank governor is at the spring meeting. The annual meeting will come in October. So this meeting provide an opportunity to equally look at the economic outlook and see how central banks and the ministers of finance that are present in the meeting can see how the rate of inflation, particularly in Africa and in Nigeria, has been inimical to economic growth. So they need more work, see how the reliance on importation can be reduced, how we can attract foreign investment that can exploit the primary products that are domiciled in Africa. If we're able to take cognizance of some of this social engineering that Barrister Ologun just talked about, then the projection of 23% may just be feasible by 2025, in my view.
Talking about controlling inflation, Barrister Ologun, now the IMF outlook also says that one setback to inflation control is the geopolitical tension that the world is currently experiencing, and that trade restrictions may push upward the prices of goods and services. Now, what should African countries begin to do to reduce the impact of the situation?
So confine myself to my blessed country, Nigeria. If you look at Section 14 of Section 2 of the Nigerian Constitution 1999 as amended, it says that the security and the welfare of the citizens shall be the primary purpose of government. So when you pay attention to these key elements, then you will achieve a peaceful environment, because when there is security, you can now engage resources to provide for the welfare of your citizens. For example, we are talking about food scarcity in the country, when farmers who should be cultivating are being killed by bandits. So why won't you have food prices? So let's assume we have been able to tame the terrorism in the land. We can produce more, not just to consume, to even export and end the foreign exchange we are talking about. Then if we have been able to provide good welfare, and how do you provide good welfare to your citizens? Our respected analyst in the studio just told us about the lending rate, interest rate in Nigeria. Let me ask you, what is the interest rate in Switzerland? It's single digit. And so why won't such economy flourish? You go to Sweden, you have peace in that environment. So if even Russia that is at war with Ukraine, Russia is doing very well in terms of economy. And that is why the world is managing that war carefully. Look at the battle going on between Hamas and Israel. Look at what happened recently when Iran fired some missiles to Israel. Israel repelled majority of those missiles. That is securing your people. So it's not just about theory, it's about practice. And let me say this, there are some wonderful signs of healthy economy, because, and you put that as your vision. You talk about low unemployment. If you fix the environment, if your tax regime is friendly, if you invest in infrastructure as against investing in recurrent expenditure, you increase your GDP, and what will happen is that investors flood in, production improves, and when production improves, there is need to meet the market demands. And I said we have that huge market. Then your citizens will be employed. Then you need a steady growth of inflation, not the kind of inflation we have in the country that today is 18% on Wednesday. On Wednesday next, for instance, it's at 27%. You see, then you talk about increase in new home construction. If you read that section 16, it even says the government should provide affordable housing for all citizens. You talk about optimism measured by the consumer confidence index. That is what you call consumer confidence index. Now we are talking about controlling price. How do you control price when somebody needs about 200,000 to buy diesel to move food from Benue State to Lagos State? These are issues. Then increasing gross domestic product. Are we productive in this country? That's a big question. You see, thank God for Dangote that succeeded in completing his refinery. Should the nation not cover her eyes as a woman with her two hands? And I'm not being gender derogatory here. The nation is like a mother with children. So these are issues. We were promised that the Port Harcourt refinery was coming on stream. For how long will that go on? So let's assume that we refine our crude oil in Nigeria. We won't be talking about not having foreign exchange or having to pursue Naira from the hold of dollars all around. So we need to put all this together and ensure that we are not left in the cold. As we speak right now, there are countries that are doing very well. You talk about Norway, I've mentioned Luxembourg, and many of them like that. And then it is the portion of Nigerians to rejoice, to enjoy the good of the land. You may want to go and do a research and find out the mineral resources that God has given us as a nation. So, and why we are poor is a question I can only answer by saying because we have mismanaged the opportunities God has given us. I told us Singapore left Malaysia in 1965. So you cannot claim now that it's because we were colonized. America was colonized at the time. So these are issues of our time. And there is this Chinese maxim in public relations that the best time to have planted a tree was 20 years ago. The next best time is now. So the government should sit down, ask a simple question. What do Nigerians deserve? Prosperity or poverty? And if your answer is prosperity, you move ahead. And let me say this, the enemies of this nation have been identified. Go after them. You saw what happened recently, how Bobrisky was slammed with conviction for abusing the Naira. I know that for a season, those who just go out there trampling on our currency, we have a second thought on that. So if there are no consequences for crime against the land, we have still not been able to mention who the 400 sponsors of Boko Haram are in Nigeria, even though in Dubai, 6 of them were identified, prosecuted, and jailed, 2 to life imprisonment, 4 to 10 years imprisonment. So if we leave all these oil thieves, it's still our oil. Recently, I was reading how about 545 pipes were connected to NNPC pipeline by oil thieves. Can you imagine? Is that not embarrassing for a nation when a region like Saudi Arabia monitors her oil facilities from an IT room? So we need to wake up. We need to wake up, and that is why we have a government. For those who argue that the government should not be blamed, then I keep wondering if what I studied in secondary school in civic, and of course at the tertiary and post-tertiary levels are not correct, then why do we have a government structure? So those are issues. So Nigeria occupies a very brilliant position. Let me say this: foreign investors are willing come and invest in Nigeria? Or do we have the enabling environment? And talking about security, have we forgotten? This month, we mark the 10th year of the Chibok girls kidnapping. Didn't foreigners come in to try and help the government? And they left. So it appears that we are not serious about making progress. But I pray and hope that this government of renewed hope will really sit up and realize that hope is made up of 4 letters, the H for help. So you need to help the people and help the nation. And the O for opportunities, create opportunities for economic prosperity and social cohesion amongst the citizens. The P stands for power. Use the power you have. Under Section 5 of the Nigerian Constitution 1999 as amended, the executive power is vested in the president. And of course, the E for enhancing the fortunes of the nation. And that is my own understanding of hope. And if we have been doing that steadily from 1960, when we gained our political independence, and not allowing the enemies of the state to draw us back, by now, Nigeria should be the 2nd richest country in the world. And I rest my case on that at this point.
All right, let's make reference to the spring meetings of the IMF and the World Bank. You observe that when it comes to international forum like this or meetings like this, issues peculiar to Africa are usually not being tailored for discussion. What do you think the African representatives can do differently this time around to ensure that in this equation, the African continent is not missing out?
You see, there is this word of the elders that you don't seek to be known, you seek to know, and what you know will make you known. In public relations, we talk about image. In public relations, we talk about reputation. Reputation is stronger and healthier than image. In fact, any image you try to build on a weak reputation will collapse. So why are we talking about America today? Which currency dominates the global business environment? Why are we talking about China? You can see how China is economically colonizing nations across the world because of performance. So if we are performing, we will be not on the table, like we say in human resource management, but we will be around the table, not on the table. And that's the point. So right now, Africa is a discussion of how can we get these guys out of poverty? How can we speak into their senses? I mean, let me ask a simple question. What country of the world, if not in Africa, with the accountant general of the federation just steal over 100 billion naira? I mean, there are questions to ask. Look at what is going on in the Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs and Poverty Alleviation, a ministry that is set up to alleviate poverty. Look at how massive looting is going on there, confirmed by EFCC. And today, no one has been brought for prosecution. What kind of a country is that? You see, so these are issues. We need to wake up. A wise man said, if you want your dream to come true, wake up. You don't remain in the sleep. So these are the problems we have. We have the resources, but I'm just afraid, and my fear, I have expressed it earlier in the status of our indebtedness. A country that is owing almost 100 trillion naira. You know, we really have a long way to go. We need to become productive. And then, again, that is why we have a government. I wish my president and commander-in-chief of the armed forces, Asiwaju Bola Ahmed Tinubu, whom I respect so much and love and pray that succeeds in office, the best. But he needs to get on his feet and really, really work. It's not about dishing out orders. And what I know as a chief superintendent of police and as a psychologist is that if there are no consequences for crime against the land, then you are only grooming the reinforcement theory in industrial psychology that says that if it is bad now and if nothing is done by way of consequence, then it will only get worse. And that is why today you hear bandits demanding trillions of naira as ransom. That is why today you find the Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs and poverty alleviation stealing billions of naira meant for the lives to enhance the fortunes of the citizens. My great nation does not deserve a palliative economy. It deserves a substantive economy of prosperity. And God has provided everything for that. So it's now left the government on what side of history the government wants to be documented, because opportunities have been given right now to the present dispensation.
All right, now, so Sam Orovwuje is still in the studio with us, and let's find out what he thinks, will happen today. So today at the ongoing spring meeting of the IMF, there will be a press briefing on global policy agenda. Yesterday, we talked about the celebrities advocating for debt relief for developing countries and climate adaptation fund. Do you see that being a part of the global policy agenda that will be announced today by the managing director of the IMF?
If you look at some of the program of action for the spring meeting, there is a particular presentation that deals with climate financing, climate adaptation, and resilience. We equally have a session, whether later today or tomorrow, that will be looking at Africa. What are the core issues as an emerging market, and how do we address those core issues? But like the barrister mentioned earlier, the critical mass for our people is visionary leadership, and where you have central bank governors across the 54 states in Africa in attendance, what they should be doing at that meeting is to canvass positions that will support economic growth in Africa. So it's not just sufficient to listen to the presentation, as it were, from the advanced countries that are the leading member, which make up about 190 countries. So the lesson for me is that those presentations that are targeting Africa in particular must be taken seriously, and the issue of inflation and interest rate is germane to economic growth. And once we're able to address those disconnect or dislocation in the way we manage our economy, therefore the subject of economic prosperity, which the lawyer just enunciated, which is the primary responsibility of government, is to provide welfare and security for the citizens. So the place of Africa at the table in those meetings must be seen from the perspective of trying to see how we can forge collaboration in Africa, so that we readdress some of this imbalance in terms of the global financial architecture, which is skewed in the favor of the developing country. This is 80 years on after the Bretton Woods institutions are created, and it was in response to a Marshall Plan to increase or improve on economic prosperity of citizens after the Second World War. Then we must take those lessons and reevaluate and recalibrate those lessons for our own development effort in Africa, particularly in Nigeria.
All right, let's wrap up with a statement credited to the CBN governor, and I'll put this to Barrister Jide Ologun. The CBN governor was trying to make some explanations attributing the shift in the foreign reserve to debt obligations. What do you think could be done differently this time around to shore up or strengthen the foreign reserves for Nigeria? According to him, he's not trying to make a case for the Naira, but he feels there's a need to make that explanation at that meeting. And what's your position to this as we wrap up?
Thank you very much. You see, we need to become productive. Forex is earned and spent. And if your outflow seems your inflow, definitely you'll be on the side of deficit. And let me say this. You look at the World Bank, for instance, the world's largest source of funding and knowledge for developing countries. To reduce poverty increase shared prosperity, and promote sustainable development. And access to them. But when we borrow money from them, what do we do with the money? It's the Director General of State Organization. So how are we leveraging on all this? Our own Dr. Adesina, leveraging all this. These are different crises we have.
We seem to be having a kind of interference there. Let's come back to Sam. Sam, let's have your view while we wait for Barrister Jide to wrap up. Now, talking about what the CBN governor said, the explanation he gave is the shift in the foreign reserve is as a result of debt obligations. You're aware of the backlog of forex and some of the issues that have to do with repatriation of funds. And so what should be done to ensure that this has been strengthened, and this is because it's coming for discussion at the meeting?
No, I think that presentation by the CBN governor is in right order, particularly in an environment where various presentations that will shape investment opportunities in your countries are being discussed. So the idea is that though we are challenged in terms of the foreign exchange market, effort has been made to sanitize that sector to a very large extent. And that sanitization will improve in terms of the economic performance of Nigeria. Therefore, even investors, they may have some second thought in terms of bringing their investment in here, is that even when you bring your investment, efforts are being made that you can repatriate your fund at the appropriate time outside the country. So in my view, in some respect, that is a kind of public relation management tool for the CBN governor, particularly with his colleagues who are other central bankers that are at that spring meeting, to see that, yes, this will improve and this will show up our foreign reserve, and we're able to do business in terms of the kind of environment in monetary policy that is being sustained. But for me, they should work more on some of the attributes that can improve on the interest regime and find a way to drag down the inflation level, which is not friendly for small and medium enterprise.
All right, let's get back to Barrister Jide Ologun. Atlantis is ready now. Let's get back to him so that you can wrap up your thoughts as regards the statement credited to the CBN governor at that forum.
I adopt the position of my respected elder in the studio there. And if we can sustain this effort at repositioning our economy to become more friendly and rewarding for collaborators, then we'll be able to walk out of the blues. But like I said, please, there should be consequences. We have read concerning CBN telling the world how some people try to scam the nation by bringing fictitious claims on our foreign exchange. Who are these people? Have they been brought to justice? And these are issues. If you don't deal with the enemies of the state, then your efforts may still be thwarted as you proceed. We wish Nigeria the best, and once again, let me appreciate this wonderful opportunity given to me. And I say, God bless Nigeria in every realm of it, particularly economically. Thank you very much.
Leave Barrister Jide Ologun. Share your thoughts on what the CBN is doing to control the exchange rate of the naira to the dollar. The Association of Bureau de Change Operators of Nigeria, ABCON, had said that they now buy the dollar at 980 naira. Now, are you optimistic that this trend can be sustained? And if you are, why are you optimistic?
I hope it is sustained. But you see, there are some in economics, you talk about micro, you talk about macro. At the macro level, we have not put in place the appropriate control. So now, I was in Canada and I needed Canadian dollars. I had American dollars. I didn't go to the street to buy the Canadian dollars. I went to a regulated environment and I was profiled before I could do that. So why do we sell our naira and dollars on the streets? So with non-state actors dictating to the state These are wrong signals. When you talk about sustainability, it means you have started doing it now.
Many thanks for your wonderful submissions on the show today. We appreciate your time and we look forward to having you another time.
Thank you.
Bye.
Early exchange, shaping policy, advancing development.